Did you know that you're a fish with legs? Every day, billions of us take something very simple for granted: walking. We've grown so used to our lives on land that many of us have forgotten that we, and animals like us, all came from ancestors in the oceans. But how did our ancient ancestors first come to walk on land? What happened to fish to create an animal that was capable of surviving out of the water? Let's find out. We, as human beings, belong to a massive group of living species called the tetrapods, or four legs. We share this group with our own closest relatives, the mammals, as well as birds, reptiles, and amphibians. If it has four legs and a backbone, then it's a tetrapod. Also snakes and whales, they used to have more limbs than they do now. Early tetrapods first appear in the fossil record during the later part of the Devonian era, between 360 and 385 million years ago. The Devonian era as a whole is sometimes called the Age of Fishes, as fishes seem to undergo a spike of diversification and dominate the fossil record from that time. Scientists recognized that one group of fish in particular seemed to be the closest relatives of the early tetrapods, called the Sarcopterygian or lobe-finned fishes. Lobe-finned fishes include lungfishes and also coelacanths that we've talked about in an earlier video. But they also recognized that it was one extinct group among the lobe-finned fishes that seemed to be the closest relatives of those first early tetrapods. These are called Elpistostegids, named after a fossil from Canada called Elpistostegele. One of the key differences between fish and tetrapods is the transformation of the fin into a limb, with clearly defined digits and a mobile wrist joint, as well as mobile elbows and shoulder joints. The shape of the skull is also different, with several bones that link the skull to the neck and shoulders in fish being either missing or modified in tetrapods, allowing better mobility of the head. We will also see that the bones supporting the hip and shoulder joints become modified, as do the spine and the ribs, to better support the weight of the animal without help from the buoyancy of water. These features were present in the earliest fossil tetrapods, like Acanthostega, but were missing from the Elpistostegid fish. Even the fossil species thought to be the very closest relatives of the tetrapods, like Eusthenopteron from Canada and Panderichthys from Latvia, lacked most of these tetrapod-like features. The evolutionary transition between one and the other was missing from the fossil record, leaving the origins of the tetrapods, and the very first vertebrates to walk on land, a mystery. Pieces of the puzzle had been found, but major steps in the story were missing. What scientists needed to find was that missing link. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers were on an expedition in Nunavut in northern Canada. They were digging in rocks from the Frasnian stage of the late Devonian, between 372 and 382 million years ago. Their research had led them to believe that these rocks in particular would be a prime candidate in which to find the missing link they were looking for. This wasn't their first expedition, but after years of trying, their persistence finally paid off when they found something truly amazing. A fossil fish, but one with key tetrapod-like features. Looking for a name to give to their discovery, the researchers asked the local indigenous people what their word was for a large, shallow water fish. And with the answer they got, they gave their name to the ancient creature, Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik was a fish, a member of the Elpistostegid group that we already mentioned. While the fossil was still distinctly fish-like, it shared key distinguishing features with the early tetrapods, like Acanthostega. Several bones of the skull were either missing or modified, creating a head shape much more like an early tetrapod than a fish. The front limb and shoulder joint had also been modified, allowing more complex movements that would have allowed the animal to drag itself and support itself over solid surfaces. As time went on, more specimens of Tiktaalik were discovered, and now most of the skeleton is known to us. It represents an intermediate form between the finned fish and the limbed tetrapods. And when we place it next to those earlier fish and later tetrapods, the transition between swimming and an anatomy that would have allowed walking on land is pretty clear. Tiktaalik is also distinct from the other Elpistostegelid fish in the types of environment that it lived in. While all three seem to live in shallow water on the margins of land, Elpistostogele and Pandoricthys seem to live in shallow salt water, like in river deltas or estuaries, while Tiktaalik, on the other hand, seem to live in shallow freshwater, similar to a floodplain. This could reflect changes in diet and ecology that would foreshadow the move onto land. While it is very unlikely that Tiktaalik could have ventured out onto completely dry land, it does represent the first step on that journey. Even with the so-called missing link discovered, the story of life venturing out onto land isn't over yet. Changes in anatomy and lifestyle seem to have happened gradually. The front limb and shoulder joint became modified before the hind limb did, and likewise changes to the spine and the rib cage also seem to have happened in increments. It's really important to remember that this is not something that happens instantaneously. It would have taken countless generations over millions of years. In fact, the earliest tetrapods that were capable of fully free movement on land probably didn't evolve until the early part of the Carboniferous period, more than 20 million years after Tiktaalik. Adaptations that would have allowed the life cycles of animals to play out completely independent of water, like an amniote egg, didn't evolve until the end of the Carboniferous period, almost 70 million years after Tiktaalik. That's longer than the amount of time between us and the dinosaurs. But it was some time during this extended period of transition from water to land, between the late Devonian and the early Carboniferous, that the common ancestor of all four-legged animals alive today lived. Somewhere, sometime, a species lived with four fully formed limbs capable of walking freely on land, and that species' descendants went on to diversify. First came the amphibians, still tied to water like frogs and salamanders. Later, towards the end of the Carboniferous, came their relatives, the amniotes. The amniotes would go on to diversify again and again into different lineages, leading to reptiles and birds, to the strange ancestors of mammals, and finally to us, alive here and now, and taking walking for granted. And it all started with Tiktaalik. The transition of vertebrates from fish to tetrapods is one of the most iconic stories in evolution, and I hope that you found it as interesting as I do. There's still so much that we don't know about the history of life on Earth, but more and more comes to light every year. Like, did you know that the ancestor of insects actually walked on land more than 50 million years before our own ancestors did? I hope you'll stick around to find out more, and you can hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell to stay informed as I upload new videos. Thank you for your time.